Hello everyone for joining us. Today we're going to go through the power of assessing your team, CPQ and the 5 factors of sales success. With us today to help lead this discussion we have Ms. Kyla O'Connell. She's a sales and marketing professional with 18 years experience. Founder of 2 successful businesses, Image Driven, an image consulting firm, and a second marketing firm called Driven Sales and Marketing, which was acquired by Asher Strategies. Currently, she serves as the VP of Business Development for Asher, is a certified Asher sales trainer, and works with companies instituting assessment tools around their hiring and development process. Kyla, thanks for joining us. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Ben, and thank you all for joining us today. So we're going to talk a little bit today, about the power of assessing your team for their natural aptitude and how natural aptitude fits into the whole big picture of sales success. So before we dive in, I'd like to share a quick story about aptitude and my failure as a sales manager and how it relates to aptitude. When I was in my 20s, I was working for a golf course management company, and I spent several years working as a salesperson for the company's private golf club. I was selling memberships and golf outings and events, and the run resulted in a promotion to sales manager for the company. And after 8 months in the position, I got a phone call. So I'll never forget the day when I was called into the boss's office, who happened to be the CEO of the company. And he and I always had a great relationship since I was his top salesperson for many years. But this time the call felt a little different. So when I met with him, he asked me how the new position was going. And I told him I had never been busier in my life. And his response was that he was concerned about my productivity, so he hired a productivity consultant to sit with me for a day. So I was a little confused by this because I actually never felt busier, yet there was a perception that my productivity was low. So the consultant came in, and by lunchtime she had identified my problem. And she said that I was taking on everybody else's stuff because I just wanted to put the fire out. I just wanted to get things done. And so I was never getting to my own stuff and my own job, which was affecting my productivity. And for me, it was that I was getting a rush from checking things off the list or completing those tasks. So not only was I taking on too much and not getting my own stuff, I wasn't teaching others how to deal with their own issues and customers and quotas and problems as well. So after the consultant's report was delivered to the CEO, we had another meeting, and he said this information didn't surprise him, and that this strength that I had of urgent task completion translated much better in my sales position because it was actually a fire in the belly, and which is great for sales. Well, that position actually had not been filled yet, so he asked me if I would be interested in moving back to sales, and I gracefully accepted. I can't tell you how many times we see this happen. Companies take their best salesperson, promote them to a sales manager position when there's a completely different aptitude for each one of these positions. So now they've shot themselves in both feet. Not only did they hire a less than stellar manager, they lost their top salesperson. So many years later, I started working with Asher Strategies, and I was introduced to the CPQ Sales Aptitude Assessment, and this whole experience of my 8 months as a sales manager failing as a sales manager actually made a lot more sense to me. I had a strong aptitude for the salesperson position and a low aptitude for the sales management position. So this goes right back to Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. 2 of the main points he makes in that book are, 1, let's get the right people on the bus, and then let's get them in the right seats on the bus. And that is where aptitude and assessing for aptitude comes into play. So after now sharing that story, let's kind of dive into some of the other factors that are combined with this whole solution. So there is a simplified solution to sales. This isn't really just our take on it. It's really agreed upon by most of the top sales institutions out there. But before we go into that solution, we really need to understand some of the problems, and some of the problems and questions that we get from our customers every day that relate to sales. One of those questions is, are top salespeople born or made? Another one is, how can I get my salespeople to sell more? And how do you simplify sales? So to answer all these questions, you kind of have to know some of the root causes or problems around sales. And one of them is one common one is it has to do with a Harvard study done of 100,000 salespeople. And the study found that 94% of the goods and services sold in this country are actually sold by 4% of the salespeople. So if we have roughly 25 million B2B business-to-business salespeople in this country, and 4% of 25 million is 1 million, that's 1 million elite salespeople and then 24 million others. So that's one of our missions behind this 5-factor formula is, well, what makes the 1 million so great? And how do we make some of the 24 million others like the 1 million elite? But before we can do that, we have to understand some more problems around sales. Another common problem around sales, of course, is the negative perception of selling. And Gallup actually the Gallup organization did a study a couple years ago asking college students about to graduate how many of them thought they were going into a sales or sales-related profession. And the results were pretty amazing. The actual results were only 5% of those graduating seniors actually thought that they would go into sales or sales-related profession. Well, Gallup followed up with them several years later and actually found out that 64% of them went into sales. So the difference there is pretty great, and a lot of it has to do with this negative perception of sales. A lot of them didn't realize that professional selling was not a negative or like an ABC or always be closing type of profession, and that they didn't want to be associated with. But here we go. Once they get into professional sales and they find that it's about building relationships and customizing solutions, and then you make a little money along the way, a lot of them actually enjoyed it and went into sales. But unfortunately, a lot of them couldn't stay there, which brings us to another problem around sales, that there's high turnover. It varies around the world. Typically, in the U.S., it's about 35%. In Europe, it's a little lower. And in China, it's a little higher. I think they are almost at 50%, 45 to 50% turnover in sales positions. So now we have identified some common problems around sales. We have a very few elite salespeople selling most of the stuff in this country. We have a negative perception of sales, and we have high turnover. So that brings us back to one of our questions that we're asked all the time, which is, are top salespeople born or made? And born would imply that it's in the DNA, that the person is just born to sell. They have a natural aptitude for it, and they can sell anything to anybody. Where made implies that there are other factors that are more important in sales success, like great product knowledge, a great understanding of the sales skills, and they're extremely motivated internally. And they work in companies with great processes around them, so they can spend most of their time selling. Well, most of the branded sales institutions in this company believe that top salespeople are both born and made, but that aptitude, that born factor, actually stands for or equates for 50% of whether someone's going to be successful in sales. That's where aptitude and assessing for aptitude comes into play. And that's how it fits into this whole simplified solution of the 5 factors of sales success. So the difference between the 1 million elite salespeople in this country and the 24 million others is that the elite salespeople have these 5 factors working for them on all cylinders. So let's take product knowledge. Obviously, that's a made factor, and elite salespeople know what they're talking about. They understand their products, their services, they understand the competitor stuff, and they understand the competitive landscape that they're selling in. And it's binary. You either have enough of it to be effective, or you're not effective. You don't have enough of it. And we've all probably had experience with the salesperson that didn't have enough product knowledge, and it really probably we weren't talking to them much longer. So let's jump into aptitude as our next factor. We recommend using the CPQ, which is one of the many sophisticated personality assessments and aptitude assessments out there. It stands for the Craft Personality Questionnaire. And we really just got involved with the CPQ because our clients were asking us how to find good salespeople. And on the selection side of the assessment, you actually get compatibility scores. So just like I was, for sales manager, had a low compatibility, but for salesperson had a high compatibility, we're looking for scores between 1 and 50, and they're broken out just like you see here. 1 to 29 is low, 30 to 39 moderate, and 40 to 50 high. So let's take a look at my compatibility chart for sales manager. Remember, the productivity consultant said that I'm a 31 out of 50, and the productivity consultant said that I had too high of a fire in the belly to complete tasks quickly instead of being a little more methodical, and it was actually causing me to get less done. Sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it is true. I was putting out fires all day and completing small tasks, but not staying focused on the larger, more important tasks of my job. And so what we're looking at here is not just the 31 out of 50, which is considered low to moderate compatibility, but also that first goal orientation trait. If you look in the basic A trait portion of the slide, you see that black tick mark that represents my score of 92 is actually in the red zone for this position, which is the perfect example of why it was very difficult for me to be successful in that position. And you can, there are different sales profiles available, so you can run people's compatibility scores against a lot of different sales profiles and also some leadership profiles as well. So let's take a look at comparing compatibility charts with the same individual. Here you have an outside salesperson profile that this person scores 40 out of 50, which means that they have a high or an ideal compatibility for this position. And what we're looking for are those black tick marks, and how those are representing her basic 8 personality traits, and how often do they fall into the green ranges. You'll see here in the outside salesperson profile, they fall in the green or yellow ranges quite nicely. But in the customer service profile, customer service representative profile, she scores on only a 24, which is considered low compatibility. And if you look, the black tick marks don't change. That's who she is. That's her personality profile. But the green ranges for high compatibility for each trait for this position have changed. And her black tick marks really are not falling in line with any of those green ranges, which is resulting in her having a 24 score out of 50 for low compatibility for this position. So what's all this mean, and why is it important? This is basically a bird's eye view of a sales team's natural aptitude for sales. We highlighted all of the 40s because those are your top, the highest aptitude on your team. And these results are pretty typical for someone, for a team that's not using an assessment yet. It's usually about a 20% of the population will score high compatibility rating for a position, and about 60% will score moderate, which are indicated in the yellow, and about 20% will score. And the reason why this is important is because it's directly related to your results in sales. These are 3 clients of ours. their growth rates and how they are in direct proportion with the number of high aptitude salespeople on their team. So the reason behind all this is that studies have shown that a person with high aptitude for sales typically outsells a person with low aptitude for sales by a factor of 4. So you can see company A is really on a strong sales growth chart, even in a recession, compared to company C. It only has 3 out of their 26 salespeople who have high aptitude for sales. The ROI on this is even more compelling. If your sales quota for a typical territory is about $4 million, and your high aptitude salesperson sells that $4 million, but your low aptitude salesperson sells only $1 million, there's a $3 million difference. And if you divide that by $100 as the cost of an assessment, you have a 30,000 to 1 ROI on this tool. So it's pretty powerful stuff. The CPQ can also be used for development of your current people, not just new ones coming in. One of the reports that you'll get when you assess your current team is the selling style profile. And what the selling style profile does is it's taking those basic 8 personality traits we talked about earlier, and it's dividing them. 4 of them are ego drive and 4 of them are empathy, and then mapping them on a 4-quadrant grid. So you see this person actually scores in the driver quadrant, the authoritative personality style, based on their basic 8 trait scores. And for further development, they get a personal development report. This is a report that's written to the candidate or to the participant who took the assessment, and it shows them where they may have extreme traits. Just like my goal orientation was 92. Well, this person's an actual 100 goal orientation. So that's an extreme trait. That's an extreme high trait. So the report is actually going to show them how to manage their time, their stress, and their career around having this extreme trait. And what the original publisher of this assessment actually has found was that people tend to succeed or fail by the extremes of their personality. So anytime we have an 80 to 100 score on a trait or a 0 to 20 score on a trait, we want to pay a little more attention to those areas because we're probably experiencing some blind spots because of the extreme. And here is just another example of the coaching report that's also given during the coaching and development side of the CPQ. And this is a report that's actually written about the person and tells the person who's managing him or her, just gives them tips about how to manage this person around each one of their basic 8 traits. And this one happens to be detail orientation, and she scores an extreme low score of only, it looks like, 8. So as a person who might be managing her, these are some tips that the assessment gives in the sales manager's coaching report. So this brings us back to our simplified solution for sales success, the 5 factors. So we talked briefly about product knowledge. We talked a lot about natural aptitude because it's 50% of the picture here. But it's not the whole picture. Selling skills is another factor. And of course, this is a maze factor. We're not born with these skills. We need to learn them and then make them habits. And I've highlighted here skill 8 because recognizing the buyer's shift and closing the sale happens to be the weakest skill. We train salespeople all over the country and even internationally, and we're amazed at how many salespeople still struggle with this skill, and a lot of them, actually. But sales skills, that's not even the entire solution as well. We also want to talk about motivation. Most psychiatrists tell us that motivation comes from within, but we also think that there are external things you can do to help motivation. And one of them is profile them. just like we talked about with the CPQ assessment, find out where they are strong naturally and where they're based on their natural aptitude and talent. Let's try to place them in that job. Me for salesperson, not for sales manager. And then once we have them in that seat, in that position, let's develop them. Let's talk about those basic 8 personality traits and where they may have extremes and what we can do about them to help them be even more effective. Training is always important. It's so common. In fact, only 1/3 of the professional sales people out there selling have had formal sales training. And it's just so helpful to the salesperson to have formal training because they know what to do. And then tools, of course. We want to give them the tools to do their job and make sure that they can spend most of their time selling because they're supported with good processes around them. And then the fourth factor in, or excuse me, the fifth factor in the simplified solution for sales success has to do with sales processes. And the 4 major business growth processes are, the first one is branding, which is that top-of-mind awareness of your company or your product. The second is marketing. Of course, there's tactical marketing and strategic marketing. So, do we have the right processes around getting and generating qualified leads for our salespeople? The third one is selling. We talked a little bit about the top 10 sales skills and how important it is to train our people with them. And the fourth is account management. Studies show in business-to-business environments, 90% of our sales come from our current clients. It's either 75% of them buying the same service from you, and then 15% of those sales are the same clients buying new products from you. So upselling and cross-selling. So when you have 90% of your sales coming from your current client base, it's account management becomes one of the most important processes of all of them. So this brings us back to our simplified solution to the 5 factors of sales success. And the answers, quite frankly, to these questions that we're asked on a daily basis, which are top salespeople born or made? And our answer is both. But 50% of that success is based on their natural aptitude, and that's why assessing for natural aptitude is so important. Second one is, how can I get my salespeople to sell more? And our answer to that is profile them, develop them, train them, give them the tools they need to do their job, and support them with the right processes around them. And how do you simplify sales? Let's focus on getting the 5 factors of sales success around each one of your salespeople, and we guarantee you will see results. And just for listening and participating today, we want to give you all something extra. For any of the sales directors or executives out there that might be managing teams of 10 people or more, please take us up on our free customized one-on-one CPQ demonstration and a free CPQ.
Thanks for that, Kyla. And we did have a couple of questions come up throughout the webinar, and I want to get to those. But before we jump into those, I just want to speak from personal experience. After we had our team run through and do the CPQ assessments, there were 2 key things that came out. One is we immediately saw problems in our staff and people that were underperforming, and getting them in the right spot, they immediately began excelling. It was literally night and day with some of the adjustments we made based on those 8 traits. And then secondly, we talked about it in an open forum, and it also helped us understand how to relate to each other and communicate to each other, knowing the type of personalities that each person on the team had. So that was just a side note from our experience with it. And it's not even being a strictly sales organization, we were able to benefit from it.
Well, thank you. That's great to hear. And we hear that kind of feedback all the time, and it's a real win-win, because not only is the organization winning because they're having a more effective performing team, but it's a win in the employee's eyes as well because they're happier and they're sitting in the right seat.
Great. All right, well, let's jump into a couple of questions. This first one from John, he says, well, what happens if you have a top producing sales rep who scores low aptitude for sales? So I think it's the reality is a little bit different than what some of these tests may show.
Right. Well, there's 4 ways that it can go, right? If you have a top-performing salesperson and a high aptitude for sales, then that makes sense. That's a check mark. If you have a low-performing salesperson and a low aptitude score for sales, then of course that makes sense. The other 2 are a little more complicated. If you have a high-performing salesperson and a low aptitude score, then that just simply means that they are a made salesperson. They probably have great product knowledge. They've probably been formally trained in sales. Maybe they're very motivated to make money, or they love their product so much, and that they're supported in an organization that has the right processes around them. So when we see a made salesperson, they can still perform at a pretty high level, but they're stretching every day. They're stretching out of their natural aptitude and their natural personality. So going forward, we want to make sure that we keep our made salespeople and have them continue the success that they're on. But we also want to make sure as we move forward with new salespeople that we try to strive for both the born factor and the made factors. And then the other 4th outcome of the CPQ is you could have a high-scoring aptitude team member and low performance. And then that usually means that there's problems in one of the other 4 factors. Maybe they're not trained properly and they're talking over the customer, or they're not closing properly, or maybe they're going through a divorce and they're not motivated at the moment, or maybe we're just bogging them down with a lot of process and they don't have a lot of opportunity to sell. That's typically how we address all 4 of those outcomes.
Right, that makes perfect sense, because we've been in that same situation where somebody scores really well but isn't performing, and it's usually another process that's broken somewhere in the chain.
Right.
Good. The next question is from Dean. It says, is there any way to test for accuracy? And I think he's asking, is there a way to game it or game the test or the questions to make myself look a little bit better? And I think he's referring specifically to getting this like before getting hired. Is there a way I can, challenge the assessment?
Right. There is what's included in the assessment called an accuracy or validity index, and it's actually right underneath the Basic 8 chart, which we reviewed earlier. And what that index will tell you is it will either say high, moderate, or an invalid. And if the person is answering questions in a faking pattern, then they are actually warned during the assessment by the system, and it will share with them, and a little pop-up window will come up, and it will say, the system has detected you're trying to leave an unrealistic, favorable impression of yourself. Please feel free to go back and change your answers, or, If they do, and they stop answering in a faking pattern, then you will see a moderate in that index window. If they do not stop answering the questions in a faking pattern, then you will see an invalid. And that does indicate that the person was trying to fake or game the assessment to make themselves look better, maybe than they truthfully are.
Right, okay, and I think I remember some of that from taking the CPQ myself, that it's sometimes a similar question just worded differently, looking for a similar response. Is that
right?
Safe to say? Okay. All right, good. And I got one more question before we go. Are there any more heavily weighted traits than others when testing for sales aptitude? And that one comes from Denise. I want to make sure I give her credit for it. So are there...
Well, I think that, it goes back to some of the algorithms and the basic information behind the research and the studies, the correlation studies that were done, and how all of those studies related to performance. And obviously some of that information is proprietary to the publisher of the assessment. However, as you learn more about the traits, you'll find that some of them have more effectiveness in sales than others. For example, social confidence is certainly, social confidence is a trait, and it relates to the level of assertiveness that you have. And in sales, we need people who are assertive, or they're not going to want to get out and meet new people and start relationships, or they may be timid when it's time to close a sale. And then we have goal orientation, which is also a very important trait in sales, because we need to have that sense of urgency to complete tasks quickly. We have quotas every month, or we have solutions to provide under deadlines. We need to have that internal urgency. So those are the two that jump out to me as important from the perspective of sales training. However, I can't answer that from the craft system perspective, because there are proprietary reasons for why some traits may have more weight than others.
Okay, so the short answer is yes, and we can say that pretty safely because we know there are certain traits that work better for salespeople.
Correct.
Right. Okay, great. Well, I want to thank Kyla again for taking the time to run us through the power of assessing your team, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. And before we hop off, Kyla, would you want to hop back to that slide? And just want to remind everybody that if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the CPQ and how these can be applied to your individual company, that there is the one-on-one demonstration, and then take the CPQ for yourself and get your own score. And I know, speaking for myself, it's very enlightening to know who I am. So.
Yes. Well, thank you, Ben. Thank you for your help today, and all of you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.